Formula One spent years convincing car makers to build the ultimate hybrid engine, and now the FIA has basically walked in like, nice $1 billion project you got there. Anyways, V8s are coming. Yes, V8 engines are apparently coming back to F1. And before everyone starts foaming at the mouth like it's 2012 and Sebastian Vettel just unlocked another forbidden Red Bull cheat code, there's a catch. Actually, there are several catches. Because this is not just a story about engine sound. This is a story about F1 selling one future, then quietly shopping for another one before the first one even got comfortable on the couch. So let's start with the headline. FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem said it very clearly. V8 is coming. That is not a random Reddit fever dream. That is not your uncle in the pub saying bring back proper engines while wearing a Ferrari cap from 2004. That is the FIA president saying Formula One will move to V8 engines by 2031, and possibly 2030. But only if enough manufacturers agree early, which is the first hilarious little trapdoor in this whole story. Because 2030 needs a supermajority from the power unit manufacturers. Basically, F1 needs the engine companies to look at the rulebook they just spent years preparing for and say, you know what, let's hit delete and start again. Good luck with that. But if they don't agree, the FIA can apparently force the change for 2031 anyway. So the message is basically, you can help us choose the new future, or we'll choose it while you're in the bathroom. Very democratic, very calm, no political landmines here at all. But here's the thing, this is not the V8 return fans are imagining. This is not bring back the screaming engines, burn the batteries, delete the spreadsheets, and let everyone qualify on vibes. No. The proposed direction is V8s with sustainable fuel and some electrification. Ben Sulayem has described it as very, very minor electrification, which is hilarious because in F1 language, minor electrification could mean anything from tiny battery to we accidentally built a small power station inside the side pod. So yes, V8s are coming. No, this probably won't be the V8 era you remember. It's less 2013 Red Bull nostalgia machine and more old school noise wearing a LinkedIn badge about sustainability. Now the big catch is not just that hybrids stay. The real catch is timing, because F1 is already committed to a massive new engine era starting in 2026. That era keeps the 1.6 liter turbo V6, removes the MGU-H, boosts the MGU-K up to 350 kilowatts, pushes the power split toward roughly 50% combustion and 50% electric, and runs on advanced sustainable fuel. In normal human language, F1 made the engine more electric, more software heavy, more road relevant, and more complicated than explaining tire strategy to someone who just asked, why don't they just go faster? And that 2026 package was not some random experiment. It was the sales pitch. Audi bought in, Honda came back fully, Ford returned with Red Bull. GM got approved as a future power unit supplier. These companies did not join because F1 said, hey, do you want to build a loud dinosaur engine and make TikTok happy? They joined because the 2026 rules screamed modern technology. Electrification, sustainable fuel, cost controls, road relevance. Basically, F1 sold them a PS5, and now it's saying, actually, have you considered this GameCube? It makes a better noise. Personally, I love the GameCube. I don't know why they wrote that. And this is where it gets ridiculous, because the V8 discussion is happening almost immediately after F1 locked itself into the 2026 to 2030 engine cycle. The sport said, this is the future. Then the ink dried. Then everyone looked around and went, okay, but what about a different future? That's not a normal pivot. That is your friend ordering an expensive wedding cake and then, while it's being delivered, asking if everyone actually prefers pizza. Now the easy answer is nostalgia. Fans miss the noise, drivers miss the emotion. Max Verstappen has talked about the pure emotion of the sport, and credit where it's due, he's right. A screaming F1 engine is not just a sound, it's a spiritual event. It enters your ears, rearranges your skeleton, and makes your bank account consider buying grandstand tickets it cannot afford. The V6 hybrids are incredible machines, but emotionally, sometimes they sound like an angry vacuum cleaner doing tax fraud. So yes, sound matters. But this V8 push is not just about making fans feel something again. It is also about F1 maybe realizing the 2026 rules went too far into complexity. Christian Homer called the 2026 engine very, very expensive and very complex, which coming from Red Bull is basically like a dragon saying, this cave is too much fire. The 2026 engines were supposed to be lighter, more agile, more sustainable, and more relevant. But then the conversation started filling with very sexy, fan friendly terms like energy management, battery harvesting, super clipping, compression ratios, ERS deployment, and lifting cost behavior into fast corners. Nothing says global entertainment product like needing a PhD to understand why a car is slowing down at the end of a straight. That's the problem. F1 is supposed to be the fastest cars in the world fighting like caffeinated fighter jets, not drivers doing battery Sudoku at 300 kilometers an hour. And when the racing product starts becoming awkward to explain, suddenly engine sound is not the only issue. The whole thing becomes a legitimacy problem. Because if fans are watching and thinking, why is he lifting there? And the answer is a 14-minute TED talk about electrical deployment limits, congratulations, you have made motorsport into homework. And here's where the story gets even more interesting. The 2026 rules have already needed refinement. The FIA has already been looking at energy management behavior, race start systems, compression ratio control, and the safety consequences of the new package. And for 2027, there's already an agreed direction to rebalance the formula. More combustion power, less electric deployment, roughly plus 50 kilowatts for the internal combustion engine, minus 50 kilowatts from ERS deployment. Which is basically F1 admitting, okay, maybe we made the battery side a little too main character. It's like releasing a video game and immediately dropping a patch because the wizard class is too powerful and everyone else is crying in the lobby. And that's why the V8 campaign suddenly feels credible. It's not just old fans yelling into the clouds. It's the reaction to actual discomfort inside the paddock. The 2026 engine was meant to be the future, but before that future has even fully matured, F1 is already adjusting it. And if you're adjusting the new era before it even feels settled, then the obvious question is, did F1 overshoot? Did they make the engine too complicated, too expensive, and too hard to sell emotionally? Because that is the nightmare. A future that impresses engineers, but loses normal people. Now let's talk about the people who may be quietly sweating in their team branded polo shirts, the manufacturers. Because this V8 plan creates a very awkward problem. Audi entered F1 because the new regulations emphasize electrification, sustainable fuel, and cost efficiency. Honda came back because the rules moved toward a much bigger electrical component. Ford returned with Red Bull around software, batteries, hybrid know-how, and modern tech. GM's power unit program is approved from 2029. Now F1 is talking about changing the architecture in 2030 or 2031. Imagine being GM. You get approved for 2029, you walk into the party, you've barely found the snack table, and suddenly the host says, great news, we're renovating the house next year. That is not ideal. Pat Simmons warned it would be negligent to throw away that investment too early, especially for manufacturers starting from scratch. And honestly, that argument is very strong. Because these companies are not building engines with pocket change they found under the simulator rig. This is serious money. Facilities, staff, dynos, software, supply chains, years of development. You don't just spend all of that for F1 to just go, thanks for joining the future, we're now leaving the future. That is a political knife fight underneath the shiny V8 headline. Fans hear V8s are back and start levitating. Manufacturers hear shortened return on investment and start calling lawyers. And F1 already knows the 2026 engine era carries risk. That's why there is an ADUO system. Basically, if a manufacturer's combustion engine performance falls materially behind the benchmark, they can get extra development opportunities and additional cost cap room. Officially, this is not a balance of performance, because F1 hates that phrase like it owes them money. It is framed as cost cap relief. But still, ask yourself this. Why do you build that kind of support system into a brand new engine era? Because you know someone could get absolutely cooked. You know the rules are complex enough that a manufacturer might show up, realize they brought a spoon to a laser fight, and need help to not become a permanent meme. That is another reason the V8 discussion is gaining traction. Simpler engines mean fewer ways to fail catastrophically, in theory. Because let's be honest, F1 engineers can make anything complicated. Give them a toaster and they'll return with a 400-page regulation document and 3 cooling loopholes. Now here's the part people are going to argue about forever. Can a V8 still be sustainable? F1's answer is basically yes, if the fuel is the story. The 2026 rules use advanced sustainable fuel, No crude oil content, derived from things like non-food biomass, municipal waste, or renewable non-biological sources. It's described as a drop-in fuel, meaning the broader dream is that this kind of fuel could work in normal combustion engines too. Audi and BP have said the FIA-defined fuel must deliver at least 65% greenhouse gas savings compared with fossil petrol. So F1's future sustainability argument is not only look how electric we are, it is increasingly look what fuel we can use. And that gives F1 a path to say, yes, we can run V8s and still be modern. Basically, the engine can sound like a war crime while the fuel department stands nearby holding a recycling bin. Is that perfect? No. Is it very F1? Absolutely. Because F1 loves solving one problem by creating three new ones, then calling it innovation. So who wins if V8s come back? The FIA wins if the engines are cheaper, simpler, louder, and easier to explain. Formula One management wins if the show gets better and the story gets easier to sell. Fans win if the cars sound more emotional and less like a leaf blower with a hedge fund. Customer teams might win if supplies costs come down and packaging gets simpler. Fuel partners could win because sustainable fuel becomes the hero of the whole narrative. But who loses? Potentially the manufacturers who just invested heavily into the 2026 hybrid concept. Audi, Honda, Ford and Red Bull powertrains, GM, anyone who built their F1 business case around the current rules. Because the 2026 era was supposed to be the platform. Now it might become the transition era. That's a huge difference. One is a foundation, the other is an expensive loading screen. And nobody wants to spend hundreds of millions building a loading screen. Now, one interesting twist is Mercedes. Toto Wolff has said Mercedes would be up for a V8 return if it is handled properly and still has relevance. That matters because Mercedes dominated the hybrid era. If anyone could sit there with a smug little hybrid crown and say, no, keep things complicated, it would be Mercedes. But even they seem open to the direction. Credit where it's due, that gives the V8 push more credibility. Because if Mercedes is not immediately throwing itself across the rulebook screaming protect the batteries, then the political door is open. But again, the key phrase is handled properly. That means not just vibes, not just louder good hybrid bad. The manufacturers will want clarity, cost limits, technical relevance, a stable timeline, because F1 changing engine direction too often is dangerous. It makes the sport look less like a carefully managed championship and more like someone scrolling Netflix for 2 hours and never choosing a movie. And this brings us to the real power move, 2030 versus 2031. 2030 is the early option, but it needs enough manufacturer agreement. 2031 is the fallback. And that date matters because the current governance framework runs through 2030. So 2031 is basically the FIA saying, after this agreement ends, we have options. That puts pressure on everyone. If manufacturers want influence, they need to engage now. If they refuse, the FIA can shape the next rules without them having the same leverage. So this is not just technical, it is political. It is about who controls F1's identity after 2030. Is F1 a super advanced hybrid technology lab? Is it a sustainable fuel showcase? Is it a louder, simpler, more emotional racing product? Or is it somehow all three because apparently the sport enjoys juggling chainsaws in a wind tunnel? And that is the contradiction at the heart of the whole thing. F1 wanted the 2026 rules because they attracted manufacturers. But now the same complexity that attracted manufacturers may be the reason F1 wants to move away from them. That's wild. The thing that made the rules politically successful may be the thing that makes them competitively and emotionally difficult. More electric power made Honda interested. More software made Ford interested. More sustainability made Audi interested. More complexity also made the product harder to understand, more expensive to build, and potentially weirder to race. So F1 is now trying to thread the smallest needle in motorsport. Keep the manufacturers, please the fans, protect the sustainability story, cut the complexity, lower the costs, bring back emotion, and don't make everyone who invested in 2026 feel like they got rug pulled by a governing body wearing a blazer. Easy. Very easy. No stress. Make sure you subscribe. Tap the video on your screen for more, and I'll see you next time.